In the shadowy corners of the American dream, where ambition intertwines with obsession, lies the chilling tale of John du Pont, a billionaire whose wealth could not shield him from the demons that haunted his mind. The story begins in the affluent suburbs of Pennsylvania, where du Pont, a member of one of America's wealthiest families, found himself consumed by an insatiable desire for control and recognition. His life was a gilded cage filled with trophies from his past glory as an Olympic sponsor and a wrestling enthusiast. John was not just a wealthy man, he was a man who craved the spotlight. He envisioned himself as a father figure to champions, a mentor who would lead them to greatness. This desire led him to recruit Mark Schultz, an Olympic gold medalist in wrestling, to train at his sprawling estate known as Foxcatcher Farm. Mark, struggling with his own demons and seeking validation in the world of wrestling, saw this as an opportunity to escape his troubled past and find purpose under du Pont's wing. The initial days at Foxcatcher were filled with promise. The estate buzzed with the energy of training sessions, and du Pont lavished attention on Mark, providing him with everything he could ever want: luxury accommodations, financial support, and a sense of belonging. However, the facade of camaraderie soon began to crack. Du Pont's erratic behavior surfaced as he oscillated between moments of generosity and bouts of paranoia. He demanded unwavering loyalty from Mark, while simultaneously pushing him into a psychological corner. As the days turned into weeks, it became evident that du Pont's obsession was not solely about wrestling, it was about power and dominance over those he deemed weaker. He sought to mold Mark into an extension of himself, stripping away his independence and forcing him into a role that felt more like servitude than mentorship. The tension mounted as du Pont's delusions grew. He believed himself to be a modern-day Roman emperor surrounded by gladiators, ready to fight for his honor. The conflict escalated when du Pont's fixation shifted from admiration to jealousy. He became increasingly threatened by Mark's brother, Dave Schultz, another Olympic champion who had come to train at Foxcatcher. Dave represented everything that du Pont was not: genuine warmth and familial love. In his twisted mind, du Pont saw Dave as an intruder in his carefully constructed world. As paranoia gripped him tighter, du Pont's actions grew more erratic and dangerous. The once inviting estate transformed into a prison filled with tension and fear. The wrestling mats that had once been a sanctuary now echoed with whispers of dread. Mark found himself trapped between loyalty to his mentor and concern for his own safety. The emotional tone of this story is steeped in darkness, a chilling exploration of how ambition can warp the human psyche when left unchecked. It is a tale that examines the fragility of trust and the terrifying consequences when admiration turns into obsession. The stage is set for an inevitable confrontation, a clash between mentor and mentee that will unravel the very fabric of their lives. As shadows loom over Foxcatcher Farm, the chilling realization dawns. In this twisted game of power, there are no winners, only victims. As the days turned into months at Foxcatcher Farm, the initial thrill of training under John du Pont began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Mark Schultz, once eager to embrace his role as du Pont's protégé, found himself increasingly isolated within the opulent yet suffocating walls of the estate. The initial camaraderie had devolved into a tense power struggle, with du Pont's unpredictable behavior casting a long shadow over their relationship. Mark's training sessions became fraught with tension. Du Pont, once a supportive figure, transformed into a relentless taskmaster. He would hover over Mark during practice, scrutinizing every move and berating him for perceived weaknesses. The pressure mounted as du Pont's obsession with perfection morphed into an unhealthy fixation on control. He demanded not just physical excellence, but absolute loyalty, often resorting to psychological manipulation to maintain his grip on Mark. The atmosphere at Foxcatcher was thick with anxiety. The sprawling estate that had promised refuge now felt like a gilded cage. Dupont's paranoia intensified. He believed that others were conspiring against him, particularly Dave Schultz. The bond between the brothers, forged through years of shared struggles in the wrestling world, became a source of contention for Dupont. He viewed Dave not as an ally, but as a rival, an intruder threatening to usurp his influence over Mark. As Dupont's mental state deteriorated, he began to exhibit increasingly erratic behavior. He would lash out without warning, his mood swinging from moments of manic energy to deep bouts of depression. The estate echoed with the sounds of Dupont's rants and the unsettling silence that followed them. Mark and Dave exchanged worried glances, both sensing that something sinister lurked beneath the surface. The tension reached a boiling point during a particularly intense training session. Dupont had pushed Mark beyond his limits, demanding he perform an impossible series of drills while berating him for any sign of fatigue or hesitation. In a moment of desperation, Mark attempted to stand up for himself, voicing his concerns about Dupont's methods and the pressure he felt under his watchful eye. Dupont's reaction was explosive. He erupted in anger, accusing Mark of betrayal and disloyalty. The confrontation escalated quickly. Words turned into shouts as Dupont's face twisted with rage. In that moment, it became painfully clear that the mentor-student relationship had soured into something far more dangerous, a toxic dynamic fueled by obsession and fear. In the following days, Mark found himself torn between two worlds, the suffocating embrace of Dupont's control and the comforting familiarity of his brother's support. Dave tried to intervene, encouraging Mark to leave Foxcatcher and seek solace elsewhere. Yet Mark hesitated, feeling trapped by both loyalty to Dupont and fear of what might happen if he defied him. As Dupont's paranoia escalated further, he began to isolate Mark from those who cared about him. He would arrange elaborate social gatherings at Foxcatcher, but would ensure that only those loyal to him were invited, people who would reinforce his delusions rather than challenge them. The outside world faded away as Dupont tightened his grip on Mark's life. The conflict deepened when Dave confronted Dupont directly about his treatment of Mark. Their conversation was fraught with tension. Dave stood firm in his belief that Dupont was damaging not only Mark's career, but also his mental health. Dupont, feeling cornered and threatened by Dave's assertiveness, responded with hostility, a chilling reminder that he would stop at nothing to maintain control over his domain. In this environment, rife with mistrust and manipulation, the bonds between brothers were tested like never before. Mark found himself caught in a web spun by Dupont, a web that threatened to ensnare not just him, but also everyone around him. As the stage was set for an inevitable clash between loyalty and betrayal, it became clear that the true horror lay not just in Dupont's actions, but in the psychological toll they exacted on those trapped within his orbit. The stakes were rising, lives were hanging in the balance as ambition morphed into madness. In the oppressive atmosphere of Foxcatcher Farm, the relationships between the characters began to fray under the weight of Dupont's manipulations and the looming threat of violence. Mark Schultz, once a hopeful athlete seeking mentorship, found himself increasingly isolated from the outside world and from those who genuinely cared for him. The bond he shared with his brother Dave became a lifeline amidst the chaos, but even that connection was strained as tensions escalated. As Mark trained under Dupont's watchful eye, he began to notice the subtle shifts in his own demeanor. The once confident athlete was now plagued by self-doubt and anxiety. Dupont's relentless demands wore him down, and he often found himself questioning his worth as a wrestler and as a person. In moments of vulnerability, Mark would confide in Dave, seeking reassurance and guidance. Dave, with his grounded nature and unwavering support, became a beacon of hope for Mark during these turbulent times. However, DuPont's influence loomed large over their relationship. He viewed Dave as a threat, not just to his control over Mark, but also to his fragile ego. The more Dave intervened to protect Mark, the more DuPont sought to drive a wedge between them. He would plant seeds of doubt in Mark's mind, suggesting that Dave was jealous of his success and wanted him to fail. This insidious manipulation left Mark feeling torn between loyalty to his brother and the twisted loyalty he felt towards DuPont. The emotional landscape was further complicated by DuPont's erratic behavior. He oscillated between moments of charm and outbursts of rage, creating an environment where fear reigned supreme. DuPont would often invite Mark to join him for lavish dinners or social events at Foxcatcher, presenting a facade of friendship, while simultaneously asserting his dominance. These gatherings became increasingly uncomfortable as DuPont would belittle others in front of Mark, reinforcing his position as the puppet master, controlling every aspect of their lives. Dave's attempts to reach out were met with hostility from DuPont. He would confront DuPont about his treatment of Mark, urging him to reconsider his methods and approach. DuPont would respond with cold disdain, dismissing Dave's concerns as jealousy or ignorance. Each confrontation only deepened the rift between them, pushing Mark further into DuPont's grasp. As the conflict simmered beneath the surface, moments of tension arose that tested the bonds between the brothers. One evening, after an especially grueling training session where DuPont had pushed Mark beyond his limits, Dave confronted him about his well-being. "You don't have to do this," he urged gently. "You can leave with me. We can find another way." Mark hesitated, torn between the comfort of familiarity with his brother and the fear of what leaving might mean for both him and Dave. DuPont watched from a distance, his eyes narrowing as he sensed the growing bond between the brothers, threatening his carefully constructed reality. In an attempt to reassert control, he interrupted their conversation with a manic energy that sent chills down their spines. "Mark is destined for greatness. You're just trying to hold him back." His voice boomed across the estate, like thunder, drowning out any semblance of reason. In that moment, Mark felt trapped, caught between two powerful forces, his brother's love and DuPont's obsession. The emotional turmoil left him reeling. He longed for freedom, yet feared what it might cost him. As days turned into weeks, the psychological toll on Mark became unbearable. The pressure mounted as DuPont continued to manipulate situations to isolate him from Dave and anyone else who posed a threat to their dynamic. The once close relationship between the brothers began to fracture under DuPont's relentless influence. In private moments away from DuPont's watchful gaze, Mark confided in Dave about his fears and doubts. "I feel like I'm losing myself," he admitted one night under the stars at Foxcatcher's training grounds. "I don't know how much longer I can handle this." Dave listened intently, offering support but also urging caution against DuPont's volatility. The emotional stakes grew higher as DuPont's behavior became increasingly erratic, his paranoia morphing into delusions that painted everyone around him as potential enemies. He began to question Mark's loyalty openly in front of others at Foxcatcher, creating an atmosphere thick with distrust. The final straw came when DuPont confronted both brothers during a training session gone awry, his temper flaring over. What he perceived as insubordination from both men. "You think you can conspire against me?" He spat venomously at Dave while glaring at Mark. "You're nothing without me." The tension reached its apex as fear gripped both brothers. They understood that they were no longer merely athletes under DuPont's tutelage, but pawns in a dangerous game, played by a man whose grip on reality was slipping away. In this suffocating environment, where trust had eroded into suspicion and loyalty had become a weapon wielded by an unstable mind, Mark faced an impossible choice: remain under Dupont's control or risk everything by siding with his brother, against a man who had once seemed like a mentor, but had transformed into something far more sinister. The atmosphere at Foxcatcher Farm had become increasingly toxic, a pressure cooker of emotions and unresolved tensions. The once promising relationship between John du Pont and Mark Schultz had devolved into a nightmare, marked by manipulation, fear, and an overwhelming sense of dread. The turning point came on a fateful night that would alter the course of their lives forever. It was late evening when Mark returned to the estate after a particularly grueling day of training. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of Foxcatcher. As he stepped inside the lavish yet oppressive mansion, he could feel the weight of the air pressing down on him. Du Pont was waiting in his study, surrounded by trophies and accolades that seemed to mock the very essence of their relationship. Mark hesitated at the door, sensing that something was off. Du Pont's demeanor was different. His eyes glinted with an unsettling intensity that sent a shiver down Mark's spine. "Come in, Mark," Du Pont called out, his voice smooth yet laced with an undercurrent of menace. As Mark entered, he noticed the room was dimly lit, shadows dancing on the walls as if they were alive. Du Pont sat behind his ornate desk, fingers steepled together in a gesture that felt more predatory than paternal. "I've been thinking about your future," he began, his tone deceptively calm. "You're not just an athlete, you're my athlete. And I need to ensure you understand what that means." Mark felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "John, I appreciate everything you've done for me, but I need some space," he replied cautiously. "I can't keep living like this." His voice trembled slightly as he spoke, but he knew he had to stand his ground. Du Pont's expression darkened instantly. "Space? You think you can just walk away from me, after everything I've given you?" His voice rose, echoing off the walls like a thunderclap. The tension in the room thickened as Mark realized he had crossed an invisible line. "John, please," Mark pleaded, desperation creeping into his voice. "This isn't healthy for either of us." He took a step back, instinctively sensing that this conversation could spiral out of control. But Du Pont was not finished. In a sudden burst of rage, he stood up from his chair, towering over Mark like a storm cloud, ready to unleash its fury. "You don't get to decide what's healthy for you. I made you. You owe me." His words dripped with venom as he advanced toward Mark, who felt trapped in a corner. In that moment of confrontation, something inside Mark snapped, a realization that he could no longer allow himself to be controlled by Du Pont's delusions. He took a deep breath and faced Du Pont squarely. "I'm not your property. I'm my own person." The words came out louder than intended, reverberating through the room. Du Pont's face twisted with rage and disbelief. For the first time, he saw Mark not as an obedient protege, but as a threat to his fragile ego. The air crackled with tension as both men stood their ground, one fueled by madness and obsession, the other by a desperate need for freedom. In that charged moment, Du Pont reached for something hidden beneath his desk, a gun that had long been a symbol of his paranoia and control. As he pulled it into view, time seemed to slow down for Mark. The reality of the situation crashed over him like an icy wave. This was no longer just about wrestling or mentorship, it was about survival. "John!" Mark shouted in alarm as he instinctively raised his hands in surrender, heart racing wildly in his chest. "Put it down! This isn't going to solve anything." But Du Pont was too far gone, his mind clouded by delusions and rage. He pointed the weapon at Mark with trembling hands, eyes wide with a mix of fear and fury. "You think you can leave me? You'll regret it." His voice quivered with raw emotion as he struggled to maintain control over both the weapon and his unraveling sanity. In that harrowing instant, everything changed. The facade of mentorship shattered completely. What had once been a relationship built on admiration and trust now lay in ruins before them. The turning point had arrived, not just for Mark but for Du Pont as well, a moment where their fates intertwined irrevocably in violence and desperation. Mark's mind raced as he realized that escape was no longer an option. He had to confront this nightmare head-on. With every ounce of courage he could muster, he took a step forward despite the gun aimed at him, a gesture not of defiance but of determination to reclaim his life. "John," he said softly but firmly, "this isn't you. You don't have to do this." His voice trembled with emotion as he reached out toward Du Pont, not to provoke but to connect, to remind him of who they once were before ambition twisted their paths. But Du Pont's grip on reality was slipping fast. His eyes darted around the room as if searching for an escape from the chaos within himself. In that moment of vulnerability mixed with madness, everything hung in balance, the fate of two men caught in a web spun by obsession and fear. As Mark stood there facing down the barrel of despair itself, he understood that this confrontation would define them both, either leading them toward redemption or plunging them into darkness from which there would be no return. The air in the study of Foxcatcher Farm was thick with tension, a palpable fear that clung to Mark Schultz as he faced John du Pont, the gun trembling in Du Pont's hand. In that moment, time seemed to stretch infinitely, each heartbeat echoing in Mark's ears as he grappled with the reality of the situation. He knew that this was not just a confrontation, it was a battle for his very life and sanity. Mark's mind raced as he searched for a way to diffuse the situation. He had spent so long under Du Pont's oppressive thumb, but now, standing on the precipice of danger, he felt a surge of determination. This was not just about wrestling or mentorship anymore, it was about reclaiming his identity and breaking free from the chains of manipulation that had bound him for too long. "John," Mark said softly, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling around them. "You don't want this. You're not a monster. You're a champion. A man who has inspired so many." He took a cautious step closer, trying to reach the remnants of the man he once admired. "You can still choose to be that person." Du Pont's eyes flickered with uncertainty, a brief glimmer of recognition piercing through the haze of rage and paranoia. For a fleeting moment, it seemed as if Mark's words were reaching him, reminding him of his past glory, of the dreams he once had before ambition consumed him. But then, like a wave crashing against the shore, Du Pont's anger surged back. "You think you can manipulate me? I made you. I own you." His voice rose again, filled with desperation and fury, as he tightened his grip on the weapon. Mark, he felt his heart race. He understood that this was a pivotal moment, not just for himself, but for Du Pont as well. "No one owns anyone," Mark replied firmly, his resolve hardening. "You taught me that we are defined by our choices. You have a choice right now. You can put down the gun and walk away from this madness." As Mark spoke, he felt an unexpected sense of clarity wash over him. The years of training, the struggles with self-doubt and fear, they all culminated in this moment of truth. He realized that overcoming this nightmare wasn't just about escaping Du Pont's grasp. It was about confronting his own fears and reclaiming his life. In that charged atmosphere, something shifted within Du Pont. The wild look in his eyes softened for just an instant, as if he were grappling with conflicting emotions, regret battling against anger. Mark seized this opportunity to push further. "Think about what you're doing," Mark urged gently. "This isn't who you are. You're better than this." His voice resonated with sincerity as he reached out once more, not just physically but emotionally, attempting to connect with the man who had once been a mentor. Du Pont hesitated, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he struggled to reconcile his actions with his identity. The internal battle played out on his face, Moments passed like hours as Mark stood unwaveringly before him, embodying both courage and compassion. Then, in an unexpected twist, Du Pont's resolve cracked entirely. The gun slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor, a sound that echoed through the room like a thunderclap, signaling both release and surrender. Tears welled in Du Pont's eyes as he collapsed into a chair behind him, overwhelmed by emotion. "I don't know what happened to me," he whispered brokenly, burying his face in his hands. "I wanted to be great. I wanted you to be great. But I lost control." The vulnerability in his voice revealed layers of pain and regret that had long been buried beneath layers of obsession. In that moment of raw honesty, Mark felt an unexpected wave of empathy wash over him. He realized that beneath the facade of power and control lay a man who had succumbed to his own demons, a man who had lost sight of what truly mattered. "John," Mark said softly as he took a step forward, "we can find a way out of this together." The words hung in the air like an olive branch extended between two wounded souls. As they sat together in silence, one man grappling with the consequences of his actions and another finding strength in forgiveness, Mark understood that overcoming their shared trauma would take time and effort from both sides. It wouldn't be easy. Healing rarely is. But in that moment at Foxcatcher Farm, amidst the wreckage of their relationship, both men began to see glimmers of hope, a chance for redemption not only for Mark, but also for Du Pont. They were two individuals caught in a cycle of ambition gone awry. Perhaps together they could forge a new path forward. Mark's journey toward self-discovery continued beyond those walls. He would need to confront not only Du Pont, but also himself and the scars left behind by their tumultuous relationship. Yet now, armed with newfound strength and clarity, he felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. As dawn broke over Foxcatcher Farm, the first light illuminating their fractured lives, Mark realized that true growth often comes from confronting darkness head-on and choosing to rise above it. The early morning light filtered through the windows of Foxcatcher Farm, casting a soft glow over the remnants of the previous night's confrontation. The atmosphere was heavy with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. Mark Schultz and John du Pont sat in silence, both grappling with the gravity of their circumstances. The tension that had once threatened to consume them now lingered in the air, a reminder of the fragile state of their relationship. As the sun rose higher, illuminating the estate, Mark knew that they could not remain in this limbo forever. The confrontation had revealed deep-seated issues that needed to be addressed, not just between them, but within themselves. Du Pont was still a man on the edge, and Mark understood that he had to tread carefully. "John," Mark began, his voice steady yet gentle, "we need to talk about what happened last night. This can't just be a moment. It has to lead to real change." He looked at Du Pont, whose face was still pale from the emotional turmoil of their earlier encounter. There was a flicker of understanding in Du Pont's eyes, but it was quickly overshadowed by his fear of losing control again. "I don't know if I can change," Du Pont admitted quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've built my life around being in control. Losing that, it terrifies me." The vulnerability in his words resonated with Mark, who recognized that this fear was at the core of Du Pont's destructive behavior. Mark took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. "You don't have to do this alone," he replied earnestly. "We can work together. You can seek help. There are people who care about you and want to see you succeed, not just as a mentor, but as a person." Du Pont's eyes filled with tears as he absorbed Mark's words. For so long, he had been trapped in a cycle of obsession and control, unable to see beyond his own desires. Now, faced with the possibility of change, he felt both hope and fear battling within him. But before they could delve deeper into their conversation, the door swung open abruptly. Dave Schultz entered the room, his expression a mix of concern and determination. He had sensed something was amiss and had come to check on his brother, unaware of the fragile truce forming between Mark and du Pont. "Mark, are you okay?" Dave's voice cut through the tension like a knife. He quickly assessed the situation, noticing du Pont's disheveled appearance and Mark's serious demeanor. "We're fine," Mark replied quickly, trying to reassure his brother while also acknowledging the complexity of their situation. "We were just talking." Dave's gaze shifted between them, suspicion etched on his face. "Talking? About what? You know what he's capable of." His protective instincts kicked in as he stepped closer to Mark. "Dave, please," Mark pleaded, holding up a hand to calm him. "I know what happened last night was terrifying, but we're trying to find a way forward." He glanced at du Pont, who was visibly shaken by Dave's presence. Du Pont stood up slowly, attempting to regain some semblance of authority despite his vulnerability. "I'm not your enemy," he said firmly, but with an underlying tremor in his voice. "I want to change." Dave crossed his arms defensively, skepticism evident in his posture. "And why should we believe you? You've manipulated us for too long." Mark stepped between them, feeling the tension escalate once more. "Because I believe he can change," he asserted passionately. "We all have our demons. It's how we choose to confront them that defines us." The room fell silent as both brothers processed Mark's words. Dave's expression softened slightly as he looked at Mark. His brother had always been resilient in the face of adversity. But could they trust du Pont after everything that had transpired? Before anyone could respond, du Pont took a step forward. Desperation etched across his features. "I know I've hurt you both," he said earnestly. "But I want to make amends. I want to be better." His voice cracked under the weight of emotion. It was clear that he was wrestling with his own demons. In that moment of raw honesty, something shifted within Dave as well. He could see that du Pont was not just a monster, but a man struggling against himself, a man who needed help just as much as they did. "Fine," Dave said cautiously, lowering his guard slightly. "But if you want us to believe you're serious about changing, you need to seek help, real help." Du Pont nodded vigorously. It was a small but significant step toward redemption, a commitment to confront not only his actions, but also the underlying issues that had driven him into darkness. As they stood together in that room, three men bound by shared experiences and struggles, the air crackled with tension but also with possibility. The path ahead would not be easy. Healing rarely is, but together they could forge a new beginning. Mark felt a sense of resolve wash over him. This moment represented not just an end, but also a new chapter for all three men, a chance for growth and transformation amidst chaos. The climax had arrived, not just in terms of confrontation, but in terms of acceptance and understanding, a pivotal moment where they could choose to rise above their pasts or succumb to them once more. In the days following the emotional confrontation at Foxcatcher Farm, a fragile truce began to take shape among Mark Schultz, John du Pont, and Dave Schultz. The atmosphere was still charged with tension, but a newfound sense of purpose emerged. As they navigated the complexities of their relationships, Du Pont's commitment to change was put to the test as he faced the daunting task of confronting his demons. Mark took it upon himself to support du Pont in this journey, understanding that true transformation required more than just words. It required action. Together, they began attending therapy sessions, where du Pont was forced to confront the deep-seated issues that had fueled his obsession and paranoia. Each session was a battle, a struggle between the desire for control and the need for vulnerability. In those therapy rooms, du Pont's facade began to crack. He shared stories from his childhood, tales of pressure from his family to succeed, of feeling inadequate despite his wealth and status. The therapist guided him through these memories, helping him understand how they had shaped his need for dominance over others. Mark listened intently, recognizing that beneath the layers of arrogance lay a man who had been deeply wounded. Dave remained skeptical but supportive, often joining them for sessions to provide a grounding presence. He watched as du Pont wrestled with his past, torn between anger at the man who had manipulated them and empathy for someone who was trying to change. It was a delicate balance. Trust was hard-won and easily lost. One evening, after a particularly intense session, the three men gathered in the living room of Foxcatcher Farm. The atmosphere felt different, less oppressive, and more hopeful. They sat together in silence, each lost in their thoughts, until Mark broke the stillness. "John," he began cautiously, "I know this journey isn't easy for you, but I want you to know that we're here for you." His words were sincere, reflecting the bond they had slowly begun to forge through shared experiences. Du Pont looked up, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I don't deserve your support," he replied bitterly. "I've hurt you both so much." The weight of guilt hung heavily in the air. "You're right," Dave interjected firmly but gently. "You've made mistakes, serious ones, but it's what you do from here that matters." He leaned forward, locking eyes with du Pont. "If you truly want to change, then show us through your actions." The conversation shifted as they began discussing their shared love for wrestling, the sport that had brought them together but also torn them apart. Mark suggested they start training again, not just as athletes, but as a team, a way to rebuild trust and camaraderie through shared goals. "Let's focus on what we love," Mark proposed with enthusiasm. "We can train together, push each other to be better, not just in wrestling, but as people." Du Pont hesitated, but then nodded slowly. "I'd like that," he said quietly. It was a small step, but significant, an acknowledgement that he wanted to reconnect with both men on a deeper level. As they resumed training sessions at Foxcatcher Farm, something remarkable began to happen. The wrestling mats that had once served as a battleground for power struggles transformed into a space of healing and growth. They laughed together during drills, shared stories of their past successes and failures, and slowly began to rebuild their fractured relationships. Mark found himself rediscovering his passion for wrestling, not just as a sport, but as a means of connection and expression. He pushed himself harder than ever before, motivated not only by personal goals, but by the desire to support du Pont in his journey toward redemption. Du Pont poured himself into training as well. It became an outlet for his frustrations and insecurities. He learned to embrace vulnerability on the mats, allowing himself to be challenged without fear of losing control. Each practice brought them closer together. They were no longer mentor and mentee or rival brothers, but teammates united by a common purpose. However, the road to recovery was not without its obstacles. Du Pont faced moments of doubt and temptation. Old habits die hard when one has spent a lifetime seeking validation through power over others. There were days when he would slip back into old patterns of thinking, moments when paranoia would creep in like an unwelcome shadow. During one such moment of weakness, Du Pont found himself alone in his study late at night, grappling with feelings of inadequacy and fear of failure. The walls seemed to close in around him as memories of past failures flooded his mind, reminders of how far he had fallen from grace. But this time was different. Instead of succumbing to despair, he reached out for help, calling Mark late at night when doubt threatened to overwhelm him. "I don't know if I can do this," he confessed shakily over the phone. Mark's response was immediate and unwavering. "You can do this, John. You're not alone anymore." His words were a lifeline thrown into the darkness, a reminder that change was possible if one chose to fight for it. In those moments of vulnerability and connection, something profound shifted within Du Pont, a realization that true strength lay not in control, but in embracing one's humanity. The ability to lean on others during times of struggle rather than pushing them away. As weeks turned into months at Foxcatcher Farm, they forged ahead together, three men bound by shared experiences and a commitment to growth. The journey toward redemption continued. Each day brought new challenges and triumphs as they navigated their intertwined lives. The turning point had arrived, not just for Du Pont, but for all three men, a moment where they chose connection over isolation and vulnerability over control. Together, they embraced the path ahead, a path filled with uncertainty, yet illuminated by hope. As the seasons changed around Foxcatcher Farm, so too did the lives of Mark Schultz, John du Pont, and Dave Schultz. What had once been a place of tension and turmoil had gradually transformed into a sanctuary of growth and healing. The wrestling mats that had echoed with shouts of anger and despair now resonated with laughter and camaraderie, a testament to the power of resilience and redemption. Mark, having rediscovered his passion for wrestling, found himself thriving both as an athlete and as a mentor. He embraced his role not only as a competitor, but as a leader who inspired others to push their limits. His bond with Dave grew stronger. They trained side by side, sharing in each other's victories and setbacks. Together, they forged a brotherhood that transcended the challenges they had faced. Du Pont, too, experienced profound changes. The therapy sessions had opened doors to self-reflection he had never dared to explore before. He learned to confront his fears head-on and began to understand the roots of his obsession with control. As he trained alongside Mark and Dave, he discovered the joy of teamwork, a feeling he had long thought lost to him. The laughter shared during practice sessions became a balm for his troubled soul, reminding him of the importance of connection over isolation. One evening, after an intense training session, the three men gathered in the living room of the estate. They sat together, surrounded by the trophies that once symbolized Du Pont's obsession with success, but now represented their shared journey toward healing. The atmosphere was filled with warmth and camaraderie. "Look how far we've come," Mark said, breaking the comfortable silence. "We've turned this place into something special." He gestured around the room, filled with memories both painful and joyful. Dave nodded in agreement. "It's incredible what can happen when we choose to face our demons together," he added, a smile breaking across his face. Du Pont looked at both men with gratitude shining in his eyes. "I never thought I could change," he admitted softly, "but you both showed me that it's possible to rebuild what's broken." His voice trembled slightly as he spoke. Vulnerability had become a strength rather than a weakness. In that moment of shared understanding, they recognized that their journey was far from over. Healing is not linear. It ebbs and flows like the tides, sometimes taking unexpected turns. But they had forged a bond that would carry them through. Whatever challenges lay ahead, a bond built on trust, empathy, and mutual respect. As they sat together in the fading light of day, Mark felt a deep sense of peace wash over him. They had weathered storms that could have torn them apart, but instead had brought them closer together. They were no longer defined by their past mistakes, but by their commitment to growth and their shared love for wrestling, a sport that had once been a source of pain, but was now a pathway to redemption. The conclusion of their individual journeys marked the beginning of something new, a collaborative effort to inspire others who might be struggling with their own demons. Together, they envisioned creating programs for young athletes, initiatives focused not just on physical training but on mental health and emotional well-being. As they discussed their plans for the future, laughter filled the room once more, a sound that echoed off the walls like music, celebrating their triumphs over adversity. They knew that while life would continue to present challenges, they would face them together, united by their experiences and strengthened by their bond. In that moment at Foxcatcher Farm, a place once haunted by shadows, they chose to embrace hope over despair, connection over isolation, vulnerability over control. Together, they stepped into the light of a new dawn, ready to inspire others while continuing their own journeys toward healing and growth. Years passed since that transformative period at Foxcatcher Farm, and the lives of Mark Schultz, John du Pont, and Dave Schultz had evolved in ways they could never have imagined. The estate, once a symbol of manipulation and obsession, had blossomed into a beacon of hope and resilience, a place where athletes came not only to train, but to learn the importance of mental health and emotional strength. Mark had become a celebrated figure in the wrestling community, not just for his athletic prowess, but for his advocacy work. He had established programs that focused on the holistic development of young wrestlers, emphasizing the importance of mental well-being alongside physical training. His workshops were filled with laughter and camaraderie, teaching the next generation that vulnerability is not a weakness, but a strength. Dave remained by Mark's side as his steadfast supporter and co-founder of their initiatives. Together, they traveled across the country, sharing their stories with aspiring athletes and encouraging open discussions about mental health in sports. They often spoke about their experiences with Du Pont, highlighting the importance of recognizing signs of struggle and seeking help when needed. Their message resonated deeply with many, breaking down barriers that had long surrounded the topic. Du Pont's journey was equally remarkable. After committing to therapy and embracing a new lifestyle focused on self-awareness and connection, he found purpose in mentoring young athletes at Foxcatcher Farm. He transformed the estate into a training center that prioritized emotional health as much as physical prowess. Du Pont became an advocate for mental health awareness in sports, sharing his own story of redemption to inspire others who might be facing similar battles. One sunny afternoon, Mark and Dave returned to Foxcatcher Farm for a special event. A celebration of their achievements and the impact they had made in the wrestling community. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement as young wrestlers gathered to hear from their heroes. The once ominous walls of the estate were now adorned with banners celebrating resilience, teamwork, and growth. As they stood before a crowd filled with eager faces, Mark felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. He looked at Dave beside him and then at Du Pont, who stood slightly behind them, his presence no longer looming but supportive. They had all come so far together. "Today is not just about wrestling," Mark began passionately, his voice carrying over the crowd. "It's about understanding that we are more than our successes or failures. It's about recognizing our struggles and knowing that it's okay to ask for help." The audience listened intently as he shared anecdotes from their journey. Stories filled with challenges but ultimately marked by triumphs over adversity. He spoke about how vulnerability can lead to strength and how true champions are those who lift each other up rather than tear one another down. Du Pont stepped forward to speak next, his voice steady, yet filled with emotion. "I stand here today because I chose to confront my demons," he said earnestly. "I learned that it's never too late to change, to seek help, and to make amends." His honesty resonated deeply within the audience. Many were moved by his vulnerability. As the event continued, laughter filled the air as young wrestlers participated in friendly competitions on the mats outside, echoes of joy replacing echoes of despair that once haunted Foxcatcher Farm. The day culminated in a heartfelt ceremony where they honored those who had contributed to mental health awareness in sports. As dusk settled over the estate, Mark stood outside looking at the horizon, a sense of fulfillment washing over him. The journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but it had also been filled with moments of profound connection and growth. He turned to see Dave approaching him with a smile. "Can you believe how far we've come?" Dave asked, his eyes sparkling with pride. Mark nodded thoughtfully. "It's incredible," he replied. We've turned this place into something beautiful, a legacy built on resilience." Du Pont joined them moments later, his presence now one of solidarity rather than dominance. "Thank you both for believing in me," he said quietly but sincerely. "I wouldn't be here without you." In that moment of unity, three men who had once been caught in a web of ambition gone awry understood that healing is not just an individual journey. It is also about connection and support from those around us. As they stood together on the grounds of Foxcatcher Farm, now a sanctuary for growth, they felt hopeful for what lay ahead. They knew challenges would continue to arise, but they also knew they would face them together, united by their pasts, yet driven by their commitment to inspire others toward brighter futures. In this new chapter of their lives, they embraced not only their shared love for wrestling, but also their shared humanity. A reminder that true strength lies in lifting each other up through life's trials. And so, as twilight enveloped Foxcatcher Farm in its warm embrace, they looked forward, not just as individuals, but as a family bound by resilience, hope, and an unwavering belief in second chances. The end was not an end at all. It was merely the beginning of an inspiring legacy that would continue to unfold long after they left the mats behind.